a surprise announcement from Congressman Tim Johnson, and a prison sentence for Lon Monk. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernard Schoenburg, and even though the legislature has not been in this past week, lots of stuff is still going on because Illinois is like that. And here to discuss it with me, lucky today to have Chris Mooney, professor of political science, University of Illinois Springfield, and nationally known in his field. Chris, welcome.
Thanks.
Well, speaking of the national scene, Congressman Tim Johnson has been somewhat of a when I was at University of Illinois in the 1970s, I think he was on the Urbana City Council. He spent 20 years or so in the Illinois General Assembly in the House, and then in 2000 got elected to the U.S. House. Just ran in his new 13th district, which includes a lot of Springfield and points south. He got an apartment in Litchfield to run there. He's 65 years old. He had initially, when he first ran, talked about being term limited in Congress, but then immediately during his first term said, hey, that's not going to work because you gain seniority and you stay. So he has stayed on. And there was every expectation that he would until we hear that he is now going to just finish out this term and let Republican officials appoint someone to take his place on the ballot. Surprise, and your thoughts?
Well, I think everybody was surprised by this one. It was not expected. Sometimes you see these things coming. For example, when Lane Evans ran last time for his seat in the
It was the old, well, I know it was the old 7th. Well, the old 17th,
yeah,
at least
right.
it had
Johnson's
become the 17th.
Yeah, and then gave it up for health reasons and basically gave it over to
Phil
Hare, who was his chief of staff, and Congressman up in Chicago area, Bill Pinsky, did the same thing for his son, who he had to bring in from Tennessee, who was down
where
teaching.
he was teaching college. Right?
That's right, and so this happens with. It's not as frequently as these things do happen because congressional turnover doesn't happen that often, but it does. It happens in enough times in Illinois that it makes it a little suspect oftentimes. But the thing with this particular one was it wasn't obvious, I think, to anybody that he was doing this for anybody in particular. And so it wasn't clear what was going on. And it was the difference between the 13th and the 5th, the new 13th and the old 15th is dramatic. And in fact, I don't think he was expected really to run in the 13th. By the Democratic map makers when they drew this thing, because his current district runs basically from Kankakee, runs down the eastern part of the state all the way down to El Dorado. It's very big. It's one of the biggest geographical districts in the eastern part of the United States. And I think it is the biggest geographical district in the eastern United States.
That's the current 15th.
That's right. And so and the new 13th overlaps a little bit with that in Champaign, but that runs over to Decatur, Springfield, down close to the Metro East area in Greene County and whatnot. So he had a lot of new territory, and he turned to on this job. I mean, he may be 65, but he's got a lot of energy.
He does have an amazing amount of energy.
He does, and when he found out about this new district, he said, I'm running, and he went for it. He basically moved to, well, like you say, moved down to Litchfield. He camped out in Springfield. He was at the state fair like every other time you were down there. He'd be there. He was on the local news. He got earned media like crazy, which, he hadn't been heard in Springfield since 2000 when he was in the State House. So he did everything right, ran a very good campaign, and easily walked to his primary, and also basically had, I think, the general election in the bag because he was running against a guy he'd already beaten 3 times.
We'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah.
So I mean, he was set, and this was a district, the 13th, that the Democrats had hoped to carve out for a Democratic person downstate. It was on the national House radar screen. They thought this was a pickup for us, but Tim Johnson just played it well in the primary, and they thought, okay, that's probably not going to happen, especially after the primary and the Democratic side. And now who knows what's going to
Yeah, and I should say that as we tape the show, it's just before his formal announcement, but all the news reports, including the one I did for the State Journal-Register, confirming that he was planning to drop out. We don't think there's a health reason. We think that it's purely for perhaps other reasons. So if we sound callous after the real news is out, we're sorry. but one of the issues, I mean, Tim Johnson is very singular or kind of individualistic.
Definitely.
As you can't put him in any particular pod here or there. He was a Ron Paul supporter, and even Ron Paul before the Illinois primary, his only appearance, I think, in Illinois was at Champaign-Urbana campus, hosted by Tim Johnson, who had already voted absentee for him because they are great friends and have lunch once a week in Washington. And Tim Johnson was dead set against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and wanted America out, which is not necessarily your typical Republican view on things like that. Some of the speculation about his dropout is that, as you mentioned, part of the new 13th also goes into Bloomington. That's where Dr. David Gill, an emergency room doctor, lives. He has run against Tim Johnson in that 15th, which is significantly Republican-leaning, 3 times.
Yes.
But as
much
a
more conservative.
Right, much more conservative. So Dr. Gill had said, well, I've been gaining each time. I'm getting closer to him. I know how to campaign. And now with this new district, which gives a Democrat a chance, this is my chance to beat him. And the Democratic establishment, and I use that term basically because, for example, Senator Dick Durbin of Springfield, United States Senator, endorsed Greene County State's Attorney Matt Gettin, who was an Afghanistan war veteran doing legal work there for the military, and much more conservative in his views. Dr. Gill is very pro gay marriage, abortion rights, and wants national health care, a single payer system, which he thinks that what people call Obamacare has too much involvement of insurance companies, which he views as evil and exploitive. So, but Matt Gettin didn't seem to perhaps catch fire as a campaigner, and David Gill has won what appears to be by less than 200 votes out of more than 30,000 cast, the Democratic nominee, which I guess, why don't you say what you think about that, because I guess the political wisdom is Dr. Gill may be too liberal for the Central Illinois district, so a replacement for Tim Johnson on the Republican side now will have a much better chance to maintain that seat for the GOP.
Well, and of course it depends on a number of things. It depends on who they pick, but I think since it will be the the Republican Party organization rather than the Republican voters, it will be somebody that will be the smart pick, right? And because basically you have Gill camped out on the left of the ideological spectrum, he's on the edge of the district, both geographically and ideologically. He's up in Bloomington. They're not going to get the fire-eating right-winger in there. I would suspect they're not going to get the hard Tea Party guy because the district is more Democratic-leaning. What they need to do is come to the center to some extent, somebody who's more traditional. The sort of Jim Edgar Republican, and if they do that, I would suspect that person, especially with backing of the parties, will have they'll have a good chance of winning in this district even without Tim Johnson. Now, it has the potential to be one of the big battleground districts in the country, and that means the congressional campaign committees for both the Democrats and the Republicans could pour money into this thing if they think if it's going to be close. Again, Gill doesn't necessarily come off as, he would not have been the establishment's choice. He's not the obvious candidate for this district. He may win if, for example, the economy picks up, Obama does suddenly great, Romney falters, and you get, something crazy happens like Ron Paul runs on a third-party ticket, so circumstances matter a great deal in this. It seems that the Democrats, this has not probably helped the Democrats too much, though they would probably rather run against somebody other than Tim Johnson at this point, no matter who it is.
Yeah, well, which is interesting because I also know that even when you look at when Barack Obama ran for president, he had been in the legislature, he'd been in the Senate, but not very long. And Tim Johnson had a very long 40-year, basically, voting record in public life, which is attackable, although the power of incumbency is also very strong. So if the new Republican candidate is someone who hasn't held office with a lot of votes in their background, perhaps that gives them less to attack.
Yes, I mean, there is that, again, this is one of those campaigns that could be sort of a massive barrage, the sort of Verdun thing where they come in here and spend, several $1 million.
You're going to make those commercial TV stations very happy when you say that.
If it happens, if it looks close, that's the key thing. If the parties think it's going to be close, they will put money into it.
I should mention just a few names that have been mentioned in some of the early stories, and among the people that I had talked to, Jerry Clark is a former. He's actually from Pawnee, Illinois, originally, which is near Springfield. Right. He was a chief of staff to Tim Johnson. He's a possible replacement. He's now still lives in Champaign-Urbana, but is chief of staff to another Illinois congressman, Randy Hultgren, who is up from the Chicago suburbs. Rodney Davis was mentioned. He is a staffer for many years to Congressman John Shimkus. He lives in Taylorville. He has also done some work on the statewide coordinated campaign of the Republican Party, so he's very knowledgeable in things. Other people mentioned were some lawmakers, including Sam McCann, who just won a primary. He's from Carlinville in the new 50th State Senate District, including Springfield. And I haven't been able to talk at this point to Sam McCann. My guess is he will continue to run for state senate, and because he's got basically a clear field to stay in the state house that way. Chapin Rose, Adam Brown are a couple of other Republican state representatives mentioned as possibilities. So we'll see what happens, but certainly an interesting wrinkle.
Right.
And I thought the work was done in that district for a while until we
you,
see how the campaign
keep
goes. I mentioned Lon Monk as we were getting into the show, so let's turn the tables a little bit and go back to those fine Blagojevich administration days. Rod Blagojevich, we know, is now in federal prison and has been for a few weeks.
Roots showing.
Possibly the gray, yes, is coming out. Lon Monk was one of his initial chief of staff. They were, I think, law school roommates or friends at Pepperdine in Malibu, California. And Lon got 2 years. Now, just a week before that, John Harris, another chief of staff for a time during the Blagojevich administration, got only 10 days. So there were those who look at those things and say, why one, why the other? The Judge Zagel in Chicago, said that, well, Lon Monk was a longtime friend of the governor, knew what he was like, knew what he was getting into. And of course, Lon Monk also left government, went into lobbying, made a lot of money off of his connections to government. So any thoughts about the 2 years, and if this further case makes other people in Illinois government take notice that you shouldn't do the wrong thing when you're there?
Well, I'd have a little different take on this. I think he was lucky to get 2 years. I think
instead of more.
Absolutely. John Harris was a sort of hapless guy brought in at near the end, the sort of latter days of the administration, like when he brought his brother in the last few months, and
when the governor brought his own brother in,
that's right,
to run
yes.
his campaign,
and he was just sort of bowled over by this thing, and Blagojevich was running rogue. Lon Monk was there from day one. Even before day one, he was one of the ones that was supposedly involved in sort of the discussion of how we can milk this thing before the inauguration.
That's right. Which came out in some of the early tapes, or some of the early proffers that the federal government was putting forward into why some of these people were indicted.
That's right. Yeah. So he knew what he was doing, and he did it for a long time. And he turned on Blagojevich at the end. But still, he could have got more than 2 years probably if they would have gone after him, and so he'll do his 2 years and hopefully figure out what he's going to do when he gets out, because he won't have his law license anymore.
Yeah, well, I know that we are getting near the end of the Blagojevich round of convictions, although one that certainly is of interest to people in Springfield. Bill Cellini has also been convicted of corruption through his alleged involvement in an attempted shakedown of someone who was an investor or had a company that was getting money to invest from the teachers' retirement system. And Mr. Cellini's sentencing is set for, I believe it's now mid-June. So I'm sure there's some pins and needles in certain households over that, and people will wonder, because he's been a kind of a major player in Springfield politics, mostly behind the scenes, but in very obvious ways over the years.
Well, also with him, if I was a person that was close to Bill Cellini, I would be worried as well, because what prosecutors and judges like is contrition, and they like cooperation. They want the rat. That's who gets off well in these things. actually did not rat anybody out. He was, as far as I can see, and what you read in the papers, was not contrite. Didn't said, this is not what I did. And the ironic thing about the way sentencing works in the criminal justice system is that, if you are not guilty, and I have no, the federal government says he was guilty. I have nothing to say about that. But in general, if you're not guilty and you stick with that and you get convicted and you say, look, I didn't do it, that looks bad, and you get a harsher sentence. If, on the other hand, you say, I'm sorry, I plea, I beg you of mercy, I was drunk or whatever, they like that. And so, he didn't do those things, and he's facing potentially a fair amount of time.
Yeah, I know it. I know the max is up to 30 years. I mean,
That's
nobody thinks it's going to be
unlikely,
that.
yeah.
But there are always these opportunities for.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's an older guy. And
77 years old now.
So I mean, it doesn't look good that he's going to walk. I mean, I suspect that he's going to do some time.
Difficult situation. We mentioned the teachers' retirement system, and that, of course, is which has something like $30 billion in reserves that pay teacher pensions for pretty much everybody outside the city of Chicago in state school districts. And just within the last several days, Dick Ingram, who is their executive director, a memo that he wrote warning of financial trouble sooner than some people thought. I think talking about insolvency by 2029 was leaked actually to Chris Wetterick, a reporter on our staff at the Journal-Register, and I know the teachers' unions were upset that Mr. Ingram was talking this way because it scares teachers. Because in all of the talk about how much the state hasn't been putting into pension systems and how much liability there is in those systems, never has there been, at least in recent history, any time when the pension checks have not gone out. There are enough reserves. Those big problems are down the road in the future if you don't add enough now actuarially to make sure that there's enough in the fund in the future. Any thoughts on that? I know the teachers' unions were not happy.
Well, of course they weren't, and basically go ballistic on something like this. What is your understanding of the genesis or the way this memo got into the public sphere? All I did was ask my colleague Chris, and he said it was leaked to me. It was leaked. Yeah, see, and see what that says to me is that this is.
And I don't know from what party, what side.
Yeah, somebody's sending a message, and I would suspect this. I don't think that Ingram did not want this out. If it's leaked, he's probably not hiding it. This was probably done.
Yeah, I can't talk about what the motivation was.
Yeah, you don't know, but I mean, a lot of times these things will be floated as a trial balloon, or look at this is what's going to happen. Get people thinking about it, applying pressure. The pension systems are messed up, and there's big problems. And somebody had to be the first one to say that this is, there could be default, there could be, insolvency. It's happened around the country. I mean, there's a town in Rhode Island, for example, that just recently basically just their pension system went bust, and they had to restructure, and everybody got like a third of what they were supposed to get, and there's a lot of firemen and police officers and teachers there that aren't too happy about it. So not to say that that's going to happen. Right. I don't think it can. I think it's a different situation here because we have these constitutional requirements.
That pension is the first thing paid.
That's right, yeah. And so.
And that you can't change pension benefit. You can't take away pension benefits someone has already earned or been told they're going to get, which some have interpreted to mean if you're a current state employee, nothing can be done to, even in the future, reduce the kind of pension plan you have. That's the question, because I think Mr. Ingram said we might have to look at reductions in what some current employees get. That's what certain legislators have said needs to happen, but you've had a lot of pushback, and this is where, in certain, like certain organizations in Chicago, business groups saying, you've got to look at current employees and reduce what they're getting, and that's what particularly drives people crazy who have counted on this as part of their life plan.
Right. So. And it's an open. On the one hand, they can do whatever they want to new employees, and they have. They've set up a new system for new employees. On the other hand, pension benefits that have been earned to date are pretty clear. Most people agree those are sacrosanct. Right. But there is that question about what happens from today. If you change them to today, and an employee from here on, if they're going to change their benefits, that's an open question, and that's something that undoubtedly the state Supreme Court is going to end up deciding if the legislature moves forward to do something.
Yes. Okay. This Finances, of course, are difficult for state government, as pretty much every government in America right now. And there has been a change in not only the top finance guy, but other people within the administration of Governor Pat Quinn in recent days. David Vaught, who has been the head of the Bureau of the Budget, or I guess they call it Office of Management and Budget in recent years, has moved over to the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, a name that was changed to that by Rod Blagojevich and somehow has stuck. Opportunity, that was one salesman there, that guy in prison now. Jerry Sturmer, who came to the Quinn administration from an advocacy group for children, is now the new budget director, I believe. Right?
That's right.
I
think he's in as an interim.
Interim, okay.
Yes.
So any thoughts just on, we're in the middle of a legislative session. They're trying to, do serious things, cutting back possible future pensions or raising some more money or cutting possibly billions of dollars in Medicaid spending. Does a change of guard at this time serve the administration well? Is that something you think that was needed, or just any thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's hard to know exactly what motivated. I mean, there's two schools of thought generally on things like this. If a situation is bad, it's better to change now, pull the Band-Aid off and get it over with. On the other hand, there's an argument for continuity, especially in times of trauma. And in this situation, as I understand it, this was a swap that had been thought about and tried to work on for a while in terms of months. And there was a concern that the old budget director, David Vaught, for whatever reason didn't want to be in the budget office anymore, and it's a pressure cooker, let's face it, it's a tough job, and he'd been doing it for a while. And but whether or not he could get confirmed as chair of DCEO, given some problems he was having with the legislature, in the Senate in particular, that was a question. But apparently they got that worked out, moved Sturmer over, call him interim for now, in order that they don't have to worry about getting him confirmed for at least a while, and see how it goes. Now, what the implications of this will be for an administration that's largely in disarray anyway, I don't know. And does it make them less relevant in the budget process and put more weight to what the legislature itself does? Probably, I would suspect at this point.
Well, we'll see. I will say one other thing that happened a while ago. Gary Hanig, who is a former legislator from Litchfield, joined basically the Quinn team to deal with the legislature some months back after Hanig retired, left the legislature, and then left a Secretary of Transportation post that he held for a while. And I think there have been high marks from the legislators that that is a good link to the Quinn administration, because Hanig understands that process. And Jerry Sturmer, I think everybody sees as someone who cares. Voices for Illinois Children was the name of the organization he originally came from when he went to the Quinn administration. So we'll see how that works, because obviously crafting that state budget by the end of May is always job one for the legislature, and it's a difficult job any year, and it's horrible when you've got $6 or $8 billion of unpaid bills sitting out there.
Well, one of the things that this demonstrates about the Quinn administration too is, it was hiring Hanig was probably the smartest move that they have made, but both Sturmer and Vaught have been working for Quinn in one respect or another since the 1970s, and since the Walker administration. And they're very been.
Was Sturmer? I didn't know that part about Sturmer.
Yes,
okay.
they've both been very close to him over the years. And this is sort of the rap on Quinn, is that he's got this tight little circle of friends. He doesn't go outside of it. And by just shuffling them around rather than bringing in some new blood. Now, he did bring in somebody from New York to run one of the
Department of Public Health, is that the
or DCFS?
Okay.
One of the public social service agencies, and that's he's done that a couple of times, bring somebody totally from out of state. But what he fails to do, and what governors often do, is to use these sorts of appointments and bring into a team sort of people that are other relevant constituencies around the state, or in the party, or other interests. And he hasn't done that, and that's often done in a very productive way by governors.
Okay, well, it reminds me a little. I don't want to say necessarily Jimmy Carter and Quinn, but we remember the kind of the Georgia cabinet, and he brought friends. So I think that's a problem in a lot of administrations. One of somebody that I covered for a long time and a colleague of yours through the U of I system, Jim Edgar, former governor, has moved back to Springfield. Just thought on, I don't know if it's a lighter note or not. I don't think he claims it has no political meaning, that he's out of politics for good, as he has said, other than occasionally endorsing candidates and certainly talking to classes, because he's still, I guess, a distinguished fellow. He kind of made fun of it himself when I talked to him. He's a distinguished fellow with the Institute of Government and Public Affairs at the U of I. So he still speaks to classes and other kinds of things in Springfield, Chicago, and Champaign-Urbana. So any thoughts on the governor? He has lived in Mahomet near Champaign since, in what he called self-imposed exile, since he left office in early 1999, I remember him saying, I don't want to be seen as looking over the shoulder of the next governor. Well, now he thinks he can come back because he and Brenda, the former First Lady, just love it in Springfield, and he now has a horse farm here. Right? So there you go. So we're going to be seeing him around the mall, I guess, in Springfield.
Maybe so. Yeah, we'll see him when he gets his haircut.
Does this have any? Do you see him? Now you teach classes, don't you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you see Jim Edgar. Does he ever come to your classes anyway?
He has, and he's very good with students. He's very free with his time. Works very hard for the university. He's very interested in public service. He's still interested in politics. There's no doubt about that. He's not going to run. He said it, I think, definitively a couple years ago when there was a discussion of the gubernatorial race, and when he came out with the fact that he's not going to do it anymore. And but yeah, I think you take him as a word, like Springfield, and it's if you are interested in state government, this is the place you want to be.
Yeah, and if you grew up in Charleston, clearly Springfield's a step up. Okay.
A big city, right?
I think we'll have to leave it at that. Yeah. Chris Mooney, thanks so much for being with me. And thank you for watching. I'm Bernard Schoenburg from the State Journal Register, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.